Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way on this episode of Off 90. We visit a soda pop maker in Spring Grove. We talk to a photographer from Minneapolis who prefers old-fashioned techniques. We learn about teacher strikes in Minnesota. And we visit outdoor movie night in Lanesboro. It's all just ahead, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Off 90. The Spring Grove Soda Pop Factory is one of those great little hometown gems that is gaining a national following. It got its start in 1895 with grape, strawberry, and root beer flavors. Using pure cane sugar, today's flavors are carrying on the old-fashioned tradition. Owner Bob Hansen gave us a tour of the bottling plant where we learned what made the soda pop a growing favorite.
The company was started back in 1895 by a gentleman by the name of G Petrowski. And in that time period, all the small towns in the area had their pharmacist, they had a little soda jerk, they had a little ice cream parlor, and typically they were all rolled into one. And G ran it for a few years, and then his brother-in-law decided to help him out with some cash, and they bought some bottling equipment. Once they bought the bottling equipment, he continued to run it for about another 4 or 5 years, and then they sold it, and it was sold about 2 or 3 different times until the Arnold Morgan family bought it. And when the Morgan family bought it, they had bought it in the early 50s, and they continued to run it. And we actually had bought it from one of Arnold's sons and his grandson. My name is Bob Hansen. I'm the owner of Spring Grove Soda Pop. When we bought the soda pop plant, my wife and I didn't realize how much people focused Spring Grove with the soda pop. It's always been a little Norwegian community to us, and which was great. It's got all its little festivals and quirks and stuff like that. But when we bought the soda pop, it was just like a light turned on for both of us that how much this business means to this community. And we've just tried to do our best to keep it going vibrant and continue to make it grow. Well, when Mr. Risky started, from what I've been told, the flavors that he started with, there were 3. One of them was strawberry, another was root beer, and the other one was grape. We offer 9 flavors. Strawberry, black cherry, cream soda, creamy orange, grape, root beer, lemon sour, orange, and blueberry. The most unusual flavor that we've had is probably the blueberry. We started to bottle that for Lanesboro Rhubarb Festival, and we ended up putting our own label on it. I think my favorite flavor is always the same. It never really varies, is the cream soda. I absolutely love the cream soda. It's got a very unique flavor. Our cream soda is a real big seller. It's the old-fashioned cream soda. A lot of the cream sodas you get today are, I call them blonde because they're clear or they're a yellowish tint. Ours is actually dark, is a dark cream soda. When we're bottling, the first thing that we'll do is we'll have the bottles are all pre-labeled. So we'll be putting the bottles onto the line, and then they'll go through a rinse cycle. And once they come through the rinse cycle, they'll go into the filler room. And once in the filler room, they're going to go right to the filler. But the process actually starts upstairs because, like I said prior, we have mixed our flavors upstairs in our syrup room, and we're sending those down. It's a gravity flow system. So the flavor is coming down, it'll go into our carbo mix. And what happens there is we're gonna blend the soda, the syrup, and the water together. It's gonna go into our carbo cooler, and there we're gonna chill it down to about 33 degrees, 34, 33 degrees, and it's gonna, once it's cooled, it's gonna get CO2 pushed into it. The CO2 adheres to the soda a lot better if it's cold than if it's warm. So now your soda, when it comes out of there, is ready to drink. It's got the CO2 pushed into it, it's nice and cold, it's about 34 degrees, and we'll push that over into our filler, and then we'll fill. We'll fill our bottles, and they'll come out of the filler full, and then they'll go through a capper, go through a little bit of a rinse cycle, and then they'll come back around to a little round table, accumulation table, and we'll typically have 1 to 2 people there boxing them up and sending them on their merry way. Well, I think that people actually really are looking for the old-time flavor, something that they just can't get everywhere. You know, there's a Coke machine and a Pepsi machine in every corner, or 2. And people really are going back to the nostalgia of it. They like it in the glass bottle. They like it that it's made with pure cane sugar. And they just want to get that old-time flavor again. I would say that our biggest drinkers of it are probably mid-30s and up, because they actually want a quality soda. I think as a small business, a typical small business in the United States, you're trying to make ends meet. You're trying to do the best you can to grow your business, to make it profitable, and maybe sell it to somebody for huge money. Little different story here. When we bought it, absolutely, we had the same dreams everyone else does when they buy a small business. But that changed rather quickly, because we found out how much this town, actually not just the town, the whole couple of counties really treasure this little business, and they support it immensely. You know, it just makes you feel good. We're just enjoying what we do, and it's keeping this little business alive, strong and alive, and that means a lot to us. So that the next person that does get it is going to have a strong business to jump into and continue the heritage of the Spring Grove Soda Pop.
Twin Cities photographer Timothy G Petrowski shuns modern digital photography. Instead, he uses analog processes such as film negatives and darkroom chemicals. Piotrowski specializes in photographing women's clothing in historical settings using antique equipment. We visit him in his studio and darkroom to learn about his process.
Well, I can't explain really even what my draw is to it. I mean, I'm just sort of doing this because I'm crazy, I guess. My name is Timothy G Petrowski, and I am an artist who uses photography. The garment she's wearing is from about 1900. And then with her long hair, it's nice and period accurate. They would have wore stockings, they might have wore a hat. There's not too much about these pictures, even though they look really simple, that hasn't been thought through. And a big part of the thinking is that I'm really looked at a lot of period photographs. These are Edwardian fashion plates from their French couture. And they were made to be, I mean, almost like a catalog photograph would be today. I've become a collector of period prints, and if I want to do a Hollywood portrait, you know, a picture that looks like a silent era Hollywood portrait, I literally have them in my collection. All of my pictures are very closely directed. What she's doing is she's just kind of holding this open, which is actually pretty risque. And so that's what we were kind of thinking about, was that there was this irony today that this is even a swimsuit. Wouldn't probably occur to us because it looks so much like a dress, but it is a Victorian era swimsuit.
I love working with Tim is because he's very accurate with his photos, he's very precise, and he makes sure that the images that he produces really do look authentic and they really are believable. So you kind of feel like as a model you kind of go back in time and you're a blank canvas that then is transformed into this period that you've never lived in.
Right now what I'm looking at, if you go in full profile to either direction, you see how the light moves on her face as she moves it from side to side. So instead of moving the light, I will direct the face and see how the light falls on her face as she moves it. I have a slow speed film and I'm using it under lower light. So I end up with exposures anywhere from 4 to 7 or 8 seconds.
You really have to be very, very still and be patient, you know, Tim is very precise and I appreciate that about him.
This is now my oldest lens. This is a Civil War era lens. It's a lens from about 1867 or so, or 1870. It's weird that I'm even this involved in this stuff as I am, because it's not, I'm not a very precise guy. I mean, it's not who I am. It's there a little, it's subtle, it's nice. Could be a nice print, actually. Here is what I spent the better part of the day yesterday. I printed this 19 times. So I had 19 prints just to arrive at a print where I felt like I was in that range where I was getting that tonal diversity that I wanted. You know, I love old photographs, and for me, kind of hitting one out of the park is when I feel like they really do feel like the era is kind of coming through. It's almost something a little like an apparition. There's almost something a little spooky. We worked with some automobiles from 1906, and there were 3 sitters, and they were all wearing all period clothes, and they had shovels and lanterns that were all correct to period. And we were out in a place where there was no sign of modernity whatsoever. There was no power lines, there were wooden fences, dirt road. And the whole crew, everybody who was there was a point where we were all just kind of like, this is amazing. Like, it was trippy because it really felt like you were seeing something you shouldn't be able to see. A pretty bad anti-trend, and so there's a lot of things that when they even begin to take on any kind of popularity, I lose all excitement or enthusiasm for.
One frigid winter day, Michael Rassman found himself outside picketing the school where he worked, and he wondered, how did we get to this point? Eventually, Mike wrote a book about the subject called Bad Blood in Economics, A History of Teacher Strikes in Minnesota. We talked to Mike about what he wrote.
The first organized teacher strike in the country occurred in St. Paul in 1948. I was kind of surprised to find out how many teacher strikes there have been in the state, and I was able to document 71 teacher strikes. But 35 of those occurred the same fall, the fall of 1981, which was the first year that teacher strikes became fully legal. So if you take away that 35, 36 left is not that many for a total. I'm Michael Rassman. I'm a writer and an amateur historian. I wrote a book called Bad Blood in Economics, A History of Teacher Strikes in Minnesota. Well, this book started out back in 1991 when I was a teacher in special education in Rochester, but I found myself standing in the snowbank with a wind chill of 54 degrees below zero because we were on strike. And I didn't understand what the union was telling us, and even what the newspaper was reporting didn't make sense to me, that why this was so important. And so I wanted to find out the story behind the story. And I couldn't do that until after I retired, but then I started digging into the history, and I went statewide for teacher strikes in Minnesota. I titled it Bad Blood in Economics because from some of the early teacher strikes, a professor up at Bemidji wrote an article, and he labeled those two reasons for teacher strikes and explained why, and it certainly made sense. There were strikes that were purely economic, and they were settled fairly quickly and with not much acrimony. There are other strikes where prior to the strike, the teachers and the school district were very close in salary, but they went out on strike sometimes for a prolonged period with a lot of anger afterwards that lingered for decades in some cases. So there were those two reasons. There was economics and bad blood that caused the strikes, and sometimes both. Proctor, for example, had two teacher strikes, one in 1981 and one about 8 years later. But both of them only lasted like 3 days, and the district people and the teachers commented that there was very little anger afterwards. It was just purely on money, no personalities involved, no threats. Both of those were settled as economic strikes. But Rochester was an example of the opposite, where the teachers and the district came very close together in terms of salary prior to the strike, but their strike occurred anyways, and it was settled in 4 days. But those of us who had been on strike who were still angry 10 years later. So that was a bad blood strike. The question I like to ask is, it's going to come down to a compromise, and neither side is going to be happy with the outcome. To me, that means that negotiations were successful if nobody's happy, but everybody can live with it. So you can either compromise before the strike and be unhappy, or you can have a strike and have the public furious and then compromise, and what have you gained? So really the moral of the story is bite the bullet and compromise. But the other thing is to be respectful of the difference between wants and needs, and that I was surprised 2 years ago the St. Paul teachers almost came to a strike, and they were because the issue was class size. Well, I was amazed that the teachers were doing that, because class size is something that typically school districts will not negotiate about. They need to control class size because it's the most effective tool for them to control costs. If they need to save a little money, just add a few more kids to each classroom. If they've got a lot of money, they can lower those class sizes. So for them to give that away to the teachers, I was amazed that the teachers even asked for that. But surprisingly, the school board up there gave in and gave them some control over class size. There were some myths in the teacher strikes that showed up typically on both sides of the issue. One of them being that if the public would only understood our position, they would be fully supportive of us. Well, I heard that exact same talk going on during the Minnesota orchestra strike a couple of years ago. It was I could have almost have lifted phrases out of the newspaper and stuck them back and forth because that was a common belief, is that if only the public really understood. But Rochester and Spring Lake Park, those two strikes occurred very close to each other. Spring Lake Park got virtually no newspaper coverage. Rochester was very thoroughly covered. They both lasted about the same time. So the amount of media coverage did not make any difference. The other myth that's out there is that those people on that side of the issue who are are not really representing their constituents. And if only we could talk to their constituents, whether that be other school board members or other teachers, then I think we could really make progress. Well, they're the spokespeople because they were chosen to be the spokespeople. And it's a waste of time, really, to think that you can go make any difference by going around behind their back. It won't work. The book has been criticized both as being anti-administration and anti-teacher. So having been criticized on both sides, I feel like I probably got it about right. But there hasn't generated a lot of interest because people don't really want to talk about or think about the possibility of a teacher strike.
A few years ago, I started making silent movies for Lanesboro Community Theater. These movies starred hundreds of local people and were shown outdoors in the fall. This project has expanded to include a handful of rookie filmmakers who create movies of their own. Join us as we visit the most recent Silent Movies in the Park After Dark.
Movies are just one example of what Lanesboro does. It's like a place where people blossom and literally discover something inside themselves that they didn't know they had. And the silent movies is just one example of it.
Tonight is special because we will be showing the movies of 7 new local filmmakers. They've all learned the process. I taught it to them in the spring, and then they each took turns shooting their movies and editing, and tonight is going to be the big reveal where everyone gets to see the movies. A lot of people who will come tonight were actually in the movies, and so it's going to be really fun.
Well, I was in a silent movie last year, and that was just a lot of fun. It's a fun way to just let off steam and kind of be someone else for a little bit. I thought it was a lot of fun. In fact, I thought the editing was the most enjoyable part for me. I just enjoyed fiddling with things until I got them exactly the way that I wanted them.
I made my debut acting in high school when I played Borachio, which was a man in a Shakespeare, and it was awful, and I forgot my lines, and so I knew I would never really want to be on stage again. But this has been a really cool opportunity to be able to be behind the camera and do some editing, and I feel like you can really tell a story with this, which is something that I didn't really think about before. I definitely could see myself using these skills again. I think it's something that, especially now as we're moving into more of the digital age, it's really important, and I've learned a lot about how to tell stories through video, which I think is a really powerful tool for marketing and fundraising and just building a narrative.
You can see your friends and neighbors turning into something out of a fairy tale book. It's different from some famous actor on a screen. Again, it's the community. Yeah, I know that story, but that's my neighbor pretending to be the guy yelling at the kid who cried wolf.
I think for me the most rewarding part is tonight, just being there, hearing the audience clap. It's gonna be I'm just gonna tear right up, I know, and I'm already starting to, when each person's movie starts and ends and everything in between, so I'm gonna cry.
That's all for this episode. If you enjoy programs like Off 90, show your support by becoming a member of KSMQ Public Television. Keep local programming vibrant in southern Minnesota. Give us a call at 507-481-2095 or 1-800-658-2539 or sign up online at ksmq.org. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Off 90.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.